the 2016 election quite often, daily, more than full-time. I have almost sort of a running blog going on Twitter where I try to update as many people as possible on on the news happening around the country and sort of my commentary on what's happening. And the reason that I'm doing this, and what's really been propelling me, is that I think that America is at grave risk of being scammed by pretend fixes to our computerized election system. And I say this because I think that most people, the average people, have no idea and the amount of misinformation that's out there. And I think that if we can correct some of these things, we can possibly achieve a critical mass of citizens who might actually be able to mobilize and achieve some meaningful change. And actually, we're already seeing that with the SAFE Act, for example. Somehow through Twitter, I heard through Ron Wyden's office, I had input, and it certainly isn't just for me, but me and other advocates on this issue. This is the act that passed the House. It's sitting sort of dormant in the Senate, but it bans barcode voting, the ballot marking devices that have the barcodes on them. So in any event, I'm going to go through some of the common myths and that I think people have fallen for, and here we go. Okay, the myth of decentralization. In reality, our election system is actually quite centralized in a way that really matters a whole lot. And by that, I mean that just two vendors, ES&S and Dominion Voting, account for more than 80% of US election equipment. And this is per a recent study by the Wharton Business School. If you add on Hart Intercivic, that's another 12%. So we're getting up to over 90% held in the hands of just three vendors. And the reason why this is a problem is that it allows either a corrupt insider or hackers. If they can infiltrate any one of these vendors, they can wreak havoc throughout the United States in our elections. Vendors are owned by private equity, and they will not disclose who their investors are. So we hear a lot about dark money. Everybody's up in arms about dark money when it comes to campaigns. But we don't hear about it so much with the vendors, and I think we have a fairly significant problem when it comes to the vendors. In North Carolina, there was an effort to, the board did ask for some ownership information. They got some really sort of pathetic answers. It drew attention to the issue, but unfortunately the DHS stepped in, told them not to worry. They looked into it. There was no foreign ownership. We had to take their word for it, I guess. North Carolina took their word for it and completely ignored the possibility that there might be some sketchy domestic ownership. So we don't really know. Not exactly reassuring. In fact, it's the opposite. So Dominion Voting, they really burst onto the scene around 2010. We don't have a ton of information about them, but what we do know is that they do most of their programming in Serbia, whose president, by the way, has a very cozy relationship with Vladimir Putin, so in many ways it might as well be programming in Russia. Not only that, about 6 months before the 2016 election, they acquired a new senior vice president who came over from an international gaming company called G-Tech, which was a former Paul Manafort client. So this is sort of an unsettling connection in and of itself. ES&S, we've heard about them. They're the largest vendor in the United States. Alone, they account for 44% of US election equipment, according to the 80s by two brothers from Nebraska who received most of their money from two billionaires that were both prominent members of the religious right. And they were both, one of them was a founding member of a group called the Council for National Policy. Another was an early member of the Council for National Policy. So what is the Council for National Policy? It's a religious right networking group. It's an umbrella organization really for all of the religious right groups. It meets about twice a year on strategy. And it's, to give you an idea, its current members, or recent members as of 2014, have included Kellyanne Conway, Steve Bannon, really the whole Cambridge Analytica crew. So the Mercers, Kellyanne Conway, Steve Bannon. It also includes Mike Pence, Wayne LaPierre, appeared to have been responsible for massive voter data leaks discovered by Chris Vickery, who will be here tomorrow to talk about some of his discoveries. He's with UpGuard, he's a data breach hunter. So they were responsible for these massive voter data breaches in the last several years. Not only that, in 2000, so you have these two brothers who founded ES&S. In 2000, one of those brothers was named president of another vendor whose incredibly infamous called Diebold election systems. And Beverly Harris of Black Box Voting reported at the time and discovered that the largest shareholder and senior vice president of Diebold election systems was a convicted embezzler. They actually bought his company. And this was soon after the ES&S, one of the two ES&S brothers moved to Diebold. So you had Diebold. You had these two companies, which by the way accounted for 70% of US election equipment and appeared to be connected, and one of them had this convicted embezzler. According to The Guardian, that convicted embezzler programmed the central tabulators. These are the county central tabulators used to aggregate precinct tallies. The central tabulators used to count 1/3 of the votes in 37 states in the 2004 presidential election. Leaks, leaks, leaks. As if all of this weren't enough, ES&S they leaked the voter data of 1.8 million voters in Chicago. After that, they leaked the passwords to North Carolina's voting machines. And again, this is something that Chris Vickery will talk about tomorrow. He's the one who discovered that. And on top of that, they also leaked the passwords for their own employees, the ES&S employees. Now this is a vendor, again, that accounts for 44% of US election equipment. It doesn't have a ton of employees. So as Chris Vickery has said, and as Lou Freisdat showed to me actually, this is the sort of thing that could, at least in a worst case scenario, compromise the ES&S systems throughout the United States. One other thing about ES&S that's worth noting, and there's plenty, but they also donated $30,000 to the GOP over the past, since 2013 or 2014. And no, it does not appear that they have made similar donations to the Democrats, at least not from the company directly. Okay, next slide. Lies. So Kim Zenner covered some of this, but just really quickly, the vendors have lied repeatedly to us. In July of 2018, Kim Zenner broke the news that ES&S had lied about remote access to its election management systems. Again, this is a huge deal because these are the county computers that are used to program every single voting machine, scanner, ballot marking device in the county. In Georgia, they're actually state-based. Maybe there's another state or two, but usually they're county-based. It's a huge deal. They lied about it, and then it was really Senator Ron Wyden who sort of got them to admit to it, and then eventually claimed that the remote access software has been removed, but we have no way of knowing whether that's really the case. So then, in August 2019, another Kim Zenner article revealed that ES&S's election management systems are also connected to the internet. And again, this followed, she mentioned how many people have been lying to the public about this. I just wanted to add on James Comey to the mix. He's in line. He gave testimony in which he said we really didn't have to worry very much about hacking of our electronic vote tallies because those things aren't connected to the internet. Certainly the election management systems are, and also the wireless modems that are put on the ballot scanners at the precincts also connect to the internet, which was something that all of the leading Homeland Security advising before the midterms that these wireless modems be removed, and he declined, and instead he put ES&S's senior vice president Kathy Rogers. He gave her some award of appreciation. So there you go. There we go. It's not just lies though, it's also false and misleading advertising. And perhaps the worst one has to do with effectively a redefinition of the phrase paper ballot. So just as soon as everybody was calling for paper ballots as what we needed, suddenly you have ES&S and the other vendors deciding that that phrase can mean not just traditional, unhacked from these overpriced and insecure and highly controversial ballot marking devices. But that's not just that. So if you don't hear it put the hand-marked prefix before paper ballots now, if you go out and you say you want paper ballots, there's a very good chance you'll get stuck with the barcode ballot marking devices for use by all voters. Other phrases that have been real pet peeves are voter marked, which we actually heard used today. And I think Election insiders know that voter-marked paper ballots is insider code for either hand-marked or BMDs. They know that. Same thing with voter-verifiable paper ballot. It can mean the same BMDs that we've been talking about that seem to be so dangerous and are, at a minimum, highly just paper record. Same thing. These things do not equate with hand-marked paper ballots, and the problem is if national election integrity groups use them, and they use them a lot. And I am not a cybersecurity expert. I'm an attorney by training, but I can tell you as an attorney by training, I know the danger that happens when you use ambiguous language. And this language is at best ambiguous. When the vendors do it, I think it's probably affirmatively, intentionally misleading. I don't know that others are doing it intentionally, but the problem is we have all this sort of scattershot messaging for voter-marked paper ballots, voter verifiable paper ballots. And then I hear people on Twitter, they're all saying, yeah, that's what they need. And they think they're asking for hand-marked paper ballots because they know that I've been talking about the ballot marking devices and others have been warning about them. They have no idea that when they put out that clarion call for voter-marked paper ballots, they may get screwed with ballot marking devices. I don't really know how to put a stop to this. I've been trying. I correct some of these groups pretty much on a daily basis when they put out posts for voter marks, but clarity of messaging is absolutely essential to move the bar on this issue. It's really essential. Fox News, if it's shown as nothing else, it's repetition and discipline in messaging moves the ball, maybe not the direction you want. So what's wrong with ballot marking devices? We've heard a lot of people talk about it, but here's another sort of election insider phrase, software independent. I may be slightly wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that there are people cybersecurity experts who would consider what comes out of these things software independent because people can view it with their eyeballs, which are independent of software. I think that's kind of the thing. They're not software independent. And obviously the whole point of having hand-marked paper ballots is to be able to have an actually software independent record of voter intent that you can use to determine if the hackable electronic tally has been manipulated. So if the printout paper ballot can be hacked, it kind of defeats that whole purpose. And yes, some people might think that sometimes the people who are either promoting ballot marking devices or minimizing it as a major concern are making a really dangerous assumption, which is that if there are going to be any mistakes or errors or discrepancies, whatever, lost traces on these printouts, that it's just sort of a scattershot random thing, maybe just a mistake. But what they're forgetting, which is they actually know, is that these things are programmed via these centralized election management systems. So it could be a systemic problem with these ballot marking devices that are systemically programmed, maliciously programmed to cause problems with the paper printouts. And no, not everyone's going to notice this. And what this really, sometimes that can seem abstract, but if you think about what happened, I don't know how many of you saw what happened in Mississippi with the vote flipping paperless touchscreen machines. Did anybody? The voters who noticed and corrected the error, it was the concern that there were undoubtedly going to be voters who didn't notice and correct the error. And this is really setting up the same thing, but with a false sense of security, because you'll have people running around saying, but paper, we have paper. It's really setting us up for sort of the same bad scenario. Okay, and then as has been mentioned, most of the current generation of ballot marking devices that we're seeing, they have some abbreviated text that some voters may check and some voters may not. But on top of that, the only thing that's actually counted as your vote is a barcode. And I actually had someone who's in advertising create this, he just created this graphic for me and sent it over. And it's every candidate, Kamala Harris, whoever you like, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, we have them for all of them. And it really, it defies principles of transparency, and it certainly is not the kind, we talk a lot about wanting to increase voter confidence. It's not the kind of thing that will increase voter confidence, nor should it. How big is this problem? I've also heard some members of the election security community that in this room, one in particular, say, okay, yeah, fine, sure. I guess this is a problem, but it's really just a tiny sideshow compared to risk limiting audits. Well, we heard the inventor of risk limiting audits say that when you use these, when you have potentially corrected paper trails, it renders the risk limiting audit meaningless. And you also heard Professor Rich DeMillo say the same thing. And it's not a tiny problem. I think some of the people who say this don't realize they're not keeping track of how many jurisdictions and where and what type of counties are actually buying these things. And this was something I was tracking fairly regularly a while ago. But by my last count, which I did stop counting several months ago, we have Georgia, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio, Tennessee, West Virginia, Texas, Kentucky, Indiana, Kansas, California, and New York. And of course, you'll hear more from Lynn Bernstein tomorrow. North Carolina, after a very contentious really battle with election security experts and voters, decided to certify ES&S's barcode express vote ballot marking device machine for universal use. So that's coming up right now in North Carolina. I've also been told that Florida passed legislation to allow barcode voting, so we can expect to see that sometime soon. Of course, the bottom line, corrupted paper trail equals a corrupted audit, which brings me to my next point, or at least it makes a nice semantic segue. Corruption. So what is fuel? Okay, other than that, actual literal corruption. Again, you have ES&S, which is the largest vendor, wants to sell these barcode ballot marking devices because they make about 2 times as much money for them as hand-marked paper ballots with scanners. Oftentimes they sell scanners with the ballot marking devices, by the way, but even when they combine the two together, it's still at least 2 times as much money for them. And what they've done, they donated the $30,000 to the GOP that I mentioned. Both Dominion Voting and ES&S have made donations to Mitch McConnell's campaign, who then conveniently has been blocking all federal election security legislation, including the one that passed the House, by the way, which is the good one, which is the SAFE Act, which, unlike the Secure Elections Act, would actually ban barcode voting, which is and another kind of dangerous ballot marking device. Philadelphia is a very striking example of some of the corruption that is absolutely proceeding, and I think it's fairly obvious, it is fueling some of these bad decisions. In Philadelphia, ES&S concealed that it had paid its lobbyists to pay the decision makers, who then chose the ES&S Express Vote XL, one of the most controversial ballot marking devices that's out there. And they chose this after they received these donations that ES&S then concealed, but it was discovered by the Philadelphia controller, who, well, and the Philadelphia Auditor General also was investigating this and found out that 18 counties in Pennsylvania overall have received $51 million contract, after the head of elections in South Carolina has received $20,000 in gifts, by which I mean travel, lodging, expenses on ES&S's dime. It sits on the election official, she sits on this secret advisory board. The news about this was broken by McClatchy not that long ago. And it's really like a boondoggle advisory board, or God knows what else they discuss on these outings. One of the outings was to Las Vegas, where they got show tickets. I have sort of befriended a former county election official who's been telling me about ES&S and its open bars. So it hosts these big open bars at all these different conventions. Texas, a Democrat there in a county, I believe it's Dallas County, but I could be wrong about that. Anyway, they chose barcode voting. And the election official was sort of busted not that long ago for asking ES&S for money for t-shirts and buttons for some fundraiser. It was politically related fundraiser. And they got a nice note back saying, sure, in the past we've just written the check directly to you, $1,500 for t-shirts, whatever, It's completely inappropriate, and sometimes maybe it seems like, oh, well, that's small potatoes compared to getting a new contract, but there's this well-known principle in marketing called reciprocity, and it's actually people feel compelled to return a favor, even if it's vastly different in value. And I think it's really incredibly inappropriate and dangerous, the corruption that is going on with these vendors. Okay, transparency is the next subject. One of the only things that seems to result in any sort of meaningful action in the United States when it comes to election security is transparency. And I say this largely because of the veteran reality winner who was an NSA contractor who came forward with the information about VR systems and 2 other election service providers that were actually breached by Russia. And as it turns out, North Carolina, it's a Durham County, they didn't ask to have those forensically analyzed by the Department of Homeland Security until after Reality Winner leaked that report. And it was he really strongly implied that was really the catalyst for doing that. And not only that, the election board was lying or misleading about the depth of its own analysis of these electronic poll books before Reality Winner came forward. Not only that, it was reported that several key state election officials said they had no idea about the Russian hacking until Reality Winner leaked this report. So this information wasn't making it to the people who kind of need to know, well, which what I would actually include the public in that, by the way, the key state election officials. So here's the problem, though, is our government opposes election transparency. And I say that in part because they locked up everyone and sent to prison. But it's not just about Reality Winner. They still won't tell us the second county in Florida that's confirmed to have been breached by Russia. You have Florida election officials up in arms wanting to tell the public, and the FBI telling them they can't. The one county that came forward, only they did it on their own. It was voluntary. Not only that, we learned just really recently, it got no attention, just in the last several weeks, I believe. It actually appears to be 4 Florida counties. They're now saying it's 4 Florida counties that were breached by Russia. And not only that, our government has never bothered to mention something which I learned from Lulu Freisdat, who learned it from Susan Pinchon, which is that VR systems didn't just, as if it would be bad enough, but they didn't just do voter registration systems in Florida. They also did election management systems, or the software for election management systems. Lulu, correct me if I'm saying it wrong. I think that's right, though, at least in some of the counties. And again, these are the centralized computers that are used to program all the voting machines in the county. So our government hasn't mentioned that to us, and I can't help but notice it's been since June, since the Department of Homeland Security massively in 2016. We haven't heard a peep from them, and certainly no promises that they're ever going to tell us what their findings are, and I'm not sure we should necessarily assume we can believe them, even if they do tell us. Okay, the next subject. Progress or no progress? All right, so Rachel Maddow and a lot of the news have been celebrating this great victory because Mitch McConnell supposedly finally caved to giving $250 million for election security funding. Yay! What they didn't mention, that they could have listened to Ron Wyden or me or several of the other people who noticed it, is that this was really just a sham. It was a joke. This was election security. They called it election security funding, but it included literally no election security requirements. This is a repeat of what happened with the Help America Vote Act, where there was well, this is less money than that, but other than that, they got billions of dollars for new voting equipment with no election security requirements, and sure, planned to maybe come up with some guidelines later, which sure they did, but they were terrible, lame guidelines, and they were voluntary. So we're really setting ourselves up by celebrating this as a victory, turning too much, but I did a lot of settlement negotiations. You're not going to get what you don't ask for. So when I see some national election integrity groups telling people and sending out with their massive email list, sending people out and telling them, tell your congressman that you want funding for election security, and not mentioning hand-marked paper ballots, no internet connectivity, no remote access, no barcode voting. Just adding on like maybe 4 things to that. When I see them doing that, that is setting us, I predicted that this is what we would get, and this is what we got with the $250 million, and I think it's what we're going to get again, because people aren't even asking. They're negotiating with themselves. They're assuming a failure before it's even happened. And I get it that Mitch McConnell is a tough cookie to crack, but we've seen with I don't use the Moscow knew that these systems were connected to the net. Kim Zetter did us a huge favor by publishing these articles in respected publications by respected journalists. If more people knew this, and shamed the people who were blocking legislation that would block that, I think we might actually get some progress, but so far I'm not seeing that in the messaging. Okay, so, next. We need that prefix, hand-marked. I don't want to hear paper ballots. Some of you will get ballot marking, depending on where you are in the country. Some of you will get ballot marking devices if you ask for paper ballots. Some of you will get ballot marking devices for all if you ask for voter marked, or if you ask for voter verifiable. Has to be hand-marked. Robust manual audits. Again, dog and pony show audits aren't going to cut it. They have to be robust. So far, the only robust manual audit that seems to have traction are the risk-limiting audits that were invented by Philip Stark and have been promoted by other very well-regarded experts, and those are supported by many national election integrity groups. They're our best bet right now for a meaningful manual audit. Clarity of messaging is important. At a minimum, say the word robust. Saying risk-limiting audits is a good idea too. Removing the modems, at least the wireless ones. I suspect we probably should remove the analog modems too, but at a minimum we need to get those modems removed. These are the ones that actually do connect systems to the internet. It has to take its word that it's removed these things. I personally think they need to be subpoenaed under oath to understand the basis for their assertion that these have been removed. Did they just make some phone calls, wink, wink, remove the remote access? I don't know. Putting this image up, a loose representation of me in black and white with a barcode over my mouth. This was sort of something I was putting around on Twitter to try to raise awareness. You need sticky messaging, I think, to raise awareness of some of these issues. Barcode voting is dangerous. I think ballot marking devices for all are dangerous even without the barcodes. But this is sticky messaging, and certainly most of the current systems have the barcodes, and it makes them worse. And by the way, yes, voters with disabilities absolutely should be allowed to use ballot marking devices if they choose to do so, and the risks have been made, the security risks have been made known. But there's no reason to force them to use barcodes either. Barcodes aren't helping voters with disabilities. They don't help anyone. They just make it less transparent. And the same is with, by the way, summary cards rather than full-face ballots. So barcode voting should just be banned. The good news, the SAFE Act. We actually did get most of these fantastic provisions into the SAFE Act. And when adopted, most of that was put back in. And it includes all this really good stuff. Hand-marked paper ballots, ban on barcode voting, ban on hybrid voting, which we didn't talk about, but that's a kind of BMD. Ban on remote access, ban on internet connectivity, and risk-limiting audits. It's all in there. We have it in there. But the problem is we have some messaging that is just pushing for funding, generic funding. Without things, though, I would push for in addition to the SAFE Act, not to push my luck, but I do think public disclosure of vendor ownership, I think, would be extremely helpful. Public disclosure of breaches that occur, I think, is critical, and there actually is an act that's received no traction. Maybe it's already completely dead. It was started, I believe, by some of those, I believe it's in the U.S. Senate or House. It's in the U.S. House. It was started by some Florida legislators who were upset that we weren't told about the breaches that occurred, and we don't know which counties were reached in Florida. And I think there should also be public disclosure of discrepancies between the poll tape results. So Benny Smith talked about how he was able to get those polling tapes at the precincts, and then you can compare those to reported totals. In some places, they're supposed to do this, but again, as someone else mentioned, there's no procedure for what do you do when there's a discrepancy. For all we know, that just gets buried somewhere, and the public doesn't get to find out there was a discrepancy. I think that would be important. And, voter registration systems. We haven't talked a lot about that, but paper voter rolls at each polling place, I think, is absolutely critical, and encouraging voters, obviously, to check their voter registrations on a regular basis. I want to see them on the stand, like cigarette companies were put on the stand. They should tell us who owns them. They should tell us when changes in ownership are made. They should tell, ES&S should tell us where, those 300 jurisdictions where it installed remote access. It should tell us exactly how they know that, and they didn't say whether it was removed before or after 2016, as Minnesota pointed out, which is kind of telling. So in any event, I think that would be, and the nice thing about this, well, there is some traction. Public Citizen, the NADC, and some other groups have already spoken with Representative Zoe Lofgren in the House about subpoenaing the vendors, and apparently she was interested. Of course, the House is a little bit busy right now. This was a while ago they started asking, it hasn't happened. The House is quite busy with the impeachment inquiries, but I think this is really important. And the nice thing about it is there isn't really particularly a deadline. Sooner than better, sooner than later would be great, but I think this would really help a lot. And with that, thank you very much. Go ahead.
Didn't Germany just pass a law on a federal level that requires that the voters are given the right to
you mean do they have hand-counted elections?
Forensic audit for the vote tally.
To have systems where the average citizen cannot observe and easily understand the process used to count their votes, and so that what they had were touchscreen voting machines, much like what the DREs that we have in the United States, and probably similar to maybe some of the ballot marking devices, and those failed that test. So it's sort of an open question whether scanners might pass the test. I don't think Germany, for the most part, uses them, but I know that I have been told that maybe there are a few places where they've slipped in, and maybe they just haven't been challenged in court. I love that test, though. I think that people talk about wanting the public to have confidence. they need to be able to understand it.
Yeah.
So,
Seems like there should be a federal law where the citizens are allowed a forensic audit before election results. Because we have a system that's so vast that maybe even election results need to be understood that it's going to take a few weeks to get through the forensic audit before it's final.
I don't disagree. I just don't think it's exactly at the top of the list in the sense, I think we need transparency before that, because of course you have to trust whoever does the forensic audit. Anyway. One more question, or?
I actually read the paragraph 144. They say explicitly, you may use scanners or what's equivalent to VPACs. That the government chooses not to use them is a different issue. But what the Constitutional Court says explicitly is you can use them.
All right, well, I read the translation, and I guess I missed that part, the English.
Yes, so I wanted to thank you for bringing up the Albany League winner who was charged and is still in prison.
Yes.
I wanted to thank you for bringing up the Albany League winner who was charged and is still in prison for espionage. She fell under the Espionage Act, and I just want to throw that out there. And I also want to ask, I've heard a lot of talk about audits. Has there been any segregation between system administrators, auditors, and other people who touch these machines? Because from my experience being in the top secret community, as long as the system administrators and the auditors can touch the same things, it's not very secure, and the chain of custody is broken.
You know, I don't have a straight answer. I just know that in the past, most of our audits, well, I can say that from people who study audits, and then I read what they wrote, that most of our audits are dog and pony shows. And my great concern, so I know that Barbara Simons from Barcode Voting said that the Secure Elections Act is great. Some type of audit to be determined in the future. Even in the recount in Florida was, in 2004 was very much, not so much an audit, but a recount was incredibly tainted, and in fact, 2 people went to prison for rigging the recount. They were changing some of the ballots to try to match. They got cheat sheets, they were trying to change them to match the electronic tally. It wasn't on it?
Ohio.
Oh, that was Ohio, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you, I'm corrected. Yes. Yes.
Yes, forgive me, I wasn't here in the morning if this has already been covered, but I understand that California is now facing a legislative attempt to bring in these touchscreen voting machines and replace paper balloting. Is that correct? And what is the campaign against it?
Well, I'm going to not entirely defer to Jim Sober, but I think he knows more about this than I do. Yes, so these ballot marking, universal use ballot marking devices, I believe with barcodes, I think the ones that are coming to California are primarily Dominion, but yes, those appear to be, there was another Secretary of State, Bowen, and she was moving the whole state to machine marked hackable paper crap. So that's my take on it. And Jim can tell you how widespread this problem is, because I know he's been following it closely.
No more questions, so first of all, thank you.